Hello everybody, my project for today is this TV right here. This is an LG 32LN5400. I've purchased this model from a second-hand site here for €30. The lady I bought it from described it as having the following fault. She said that it will work fine for maybe 20 or 30 minutes and then she comes back to the TV and there's sound and no picture. So to anybody who works with TVs, that sounds like a backlight fault. So I've got this TV back on my desk and right now it is working as she said it would. I'm expecting it to fail shortly, so what I intend to do first is take down all the voltages that I can measure from the power board so that I can then compare them to what those same voltages look like when the TV eventually fails. So let's go and do that now. Okay, so this is a picture of my power board on my LG TV. As you can see, it is still plugged in. So my plan here is to take all the voltages with the TV as it is working, because it's going to fail pretty soon. Now, just before I do any further work on this here, I just want to say this is by no means a suggestion video that everybody should go and get a multimeter. There's very, very high voltages in this, so this video is purely for demonstration purposes only. With that said, let's take down some numbers. This power board is what they call a switch mode power supply. I'm not going to go into the detail of that today. What I like to try and do is, simplify these problems, and really what we're trying to find out here is not how it works. What we really want to know is we have an input of about 230 AC coming in here, and we have two output connectors right here, this one here and this one here. So this connector here carries DC voltages to what's called the main board, the main AV board, and this connector right here carries the voltage to the LEDs, to turn on the LEDs. So I want to check what the voltages are on the two of these connectors here to see if they're in line with what they should be. I actually have a schematic for this board. The board is an LG P32I13PL1. So that's the model number. I was able to get a schematic for it. I also have a little map of all of the voltages here that they should correspond to these. So let's take some measurements and see how we go. So I'm going to switch my multimeter to volts DC. My multimeter has an auto range and it could be quite high voltages on this, so we can't just use the 20 volt range anymore like we do for laptops. So volts DC auto range, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to place my black probe to ground pin, which is the pin right here. Let's zoom in a little on that, and we're going to start taking some measurements with our red probe. So I introduce my red probe, and okay, so on this pin right here we get 12 volts. On this pin right here we get 12 volts also. This pin here is another ground. This pin here is 24 volts. This is another ground. This is 3.3. This is 3.3. And this is 3.3 also. So let's put up those measurements as I found them. Now, as you can see down below here, there is actually a list of these voltages. There's a second row of pins as well, which I'm not going to bother with for the moment because the 12 volt here is the same as the 12 volt on the second row of pins, and the 24 volt here is the same as the 24 volt. What I want to do is basically check that the three voltage rails that we have in this, the 12 volt is online, the 24 volt is online, and the 3.3 volt is online. This down here is actually a BL on, which is high if the TV is turned on, so I know that this is getting the signal for the TV to turn on as well. So those are the voltages going to the main board. So the next output from this board is this right over here. So I'm going to use the same ground I was using on this one over here and measure right here. And when I measured these two pins, I found the following. I found that there was 80.5 volts on this pin here and 25.7 volts on this. I'm not sure why that's measuring 25.7 volts there. Maybe somebody in the comments could explain. The two pins here in the middle, by the way, are not relevant, but I've checked on the documentation for this board. Let me just show. And what I find is that this board doesn't seem like it's exactly the same, even though the model number is supposedly the same. But the output voltages for the LEDs is given as 81.4. So I know that that is in and around the right range, and that's good enough for me. Once again, these are the voltages with the TV working. So I now know what everything should look like when the TV is functional. I'm going to wait for this thing to break, and then we're going to come back and see where the voltages are when that happens. Okay, so after about 25 minutes of TV watching, the TV net has now gone dark and there is nothing on the screen, and it won't come back on after a power cycle. So what I want to do now is go back and check the voltages on this board while the TV is not working. So I brought in my probes in the same way and measured the same voltages using this pin as my ground, and what I found on check this. So what I found on the voltages that were going to the main board was that all of these were still as they should have been. Okay, so it seemed that all of these voltages were staying online and that there was an issue with the backlight circuit itself, which is what I suspected from the start. So when this TV had gone faulty, these are the voltages that I was seeing on these pins right here. Now, these look like very strange voltages, but the fact that they were different is really all that I ever take from these. I've no idea why those voltages went so high, but the pin right here was cycling between 125 volts and 135 volts. This one right here was cycling between 70 and 80 volts. So when working, these are all the same. When it's not working, these are all the same. This circuit, as far as I'm concerned, is still good. Okay, and it's this on its own that is not working when it fails. So we have an issue with either the LED driver circuit on this board or an issue with the LEDs themselves. Now, a lot of the times you can have an LED that fails. It's pretty easy to, once you've determined there's an issue with the backlight, you can then sort of split the problem in two. There is a backlight tester that unfortunately most people won't have. I have one because I get a few TVs, and you can have a backlight tester that will allow you to plug out the LEDs, connect it to this separate power source, and then you can view and see if there's any dark spots on the screen indicating that any of the LEDs have blown. So I'm going to show you the device I have for doing that. This is the LED tester that I bought a couple of years ago for about maybe 20 or 30 euros. You know it's good because it has the word super on the front of it. I always buy everything that has super on it, but this is actually pretty good in fairness. So with my super LED tester, I disconnected this cable right here completely from my power board. I hooked it up to my LED tester just with the two probes on the two wires right here. I will show how to do that in another video if there's enough interest in it. When I did that, the LEDs were working fine. There was none blown, there was no dodgy strips. All of the strips and all of the LEDs were working. So what I'm reading at that point is that we know we have a backlight failure. We know that our LEDs are good, so that it must be something to do with the circuit that's around here that drives the LEDs. Now, I've done a visual inspection of the components up here and they all look good, but I know there's a driver chip somewhere on the back of this, and we need to find that and just see if it and all of the components around it look good. So let's flip the board. Right now we're looking at the flip side of the power board. So I've identified right here a chip that looks like the same size and shape of these LED driver chips. A quick look to my schematic shows me that that is it for sure. MAP MAP3202SIRH. That's it, and that's the pinout configuration for that chip in case anybody is interested. But we know that it's components around that section that are relevant to what's happening to the driver circuit. So there's nothing immediately that stuck out to me as being damaged. There's no blown resistors or capacitors in particular. They all look okay. But one thing that did look unusual to me was there was just a couple of joints, and unfortunately, because of my poor photography skills, it's not going to be as easy to identify them as it was when I was looking at them. But the ones that I identified as being poor joints were the four that were on this inductor here. It's a very big inductor. It's hard to see from this photo, but these were actually quite sunken. So I topped up 1, 2, 3 and 4. I just reflowed the solder. I reflowed a fresh bit of solder into them and brought those connections out so they were good joints. Also, this one right here looked very poor. That was with a resistor. That's a true hole resistor there. So I touched up that joint there as well. And while I was at it, I did the 2 joints here and here, which didn't necessarily look terribly bad, but didn't look great either. So when I had those done, I said I would just flip it around, put it back in the board, just to, you know, check that box to say, look, I checked the joints and I checked visually, and, you know, there was nothing major wrong. But when I did that, the TV came back on again. Now, I thought that it was probably just gaslighting me in the way that these things do, but we're now 3 days later, and I've left the TV in store demo mode, and it's been working perfectly ever since. So it seems like that's the fault. I left it a long bit of time because I was expecting, like I said, the issue to record, but it just hasn't. And I'm going to show that TV now. So this is my TV now, 3 days later. I've left it on in store demo mode and it's stayed on the whole time. So it seems like it was just those cold joints. Obviously that's a big win. Usually in this scenario you end up having to send off for a strip of LEDs. But that's it. So I have myself a working TV for €30. I'm going to put on screen the joints that I topped up, because I think this is the sort of thing that may happen on these models of TVs. Be interested to see if it can help somebody else. As you see here, we've other projects and these are coming up. This is particularly nasty, but just for today, this is my LG TV and it's working fine. Just to finish off, marked in red here are the joints that I resoldered, and after I resoldered these joints, the TV worked. So that's it for today. I know you guys all want to see laptops, but I don't have any interest in laptop ones at the moment. I've one for next week and that's coming soon. So please like and subscribe, leave any comments you have below, and I'll see you on the next one.